we've said, on paper, they should be absolutely thriving. They've got, pretty much capped diamonds up in most positions across the court. So yeah, I think they probably need to find a way to reinvigorate themselves or develop a sort of vastly different game plan to what they've been running with this year.
The Australian diamond shooting combination, they've been now together for 2 or 3 seasons at the Vixens. So they're consistently working together and have been praised for being such a strong combination, but 165 turnovers between 2 players is not good enough. And obviously the Magic ended up winning a premiership 5 years later, but the Swifts do not have 5 years with Grace Nowicki to be able to achieve that. They needed it this season, and I think they're not going to do it. I think Well, kia ora Netball Scoop whānau, and welcome back to the Netball Scoop YouTube channel. I mean, today's not a usual podcast episode for us because we're actually back together, me and Georgia. So we will be recapping the 2025 Super Netball season and also giving you guys a little bit of a finals preview. So Georgia, how are we feeling about that 2025 season?
Yeah, I mean, other than the Lightning being pushed out of finals at the last moment on the weekend,
Oh.
which was a bit devastating for me, especially being at the game in Adelaide. I'm really excited to see what the final series has up ahead, and I certainly think the season probably didn't pan out as many of us expected it to. There were certainly some teams that overperformed and some teams that underperformed. So really looking forward to digging into some of that today.
Yeah, and I mean, just to back up on that, I mean, it's 100%. There's so many teams that, as we'll highlight today, that started off really shoddy, I think is the best way to probably say it, and then they just steadily climbed, and then others were so great at the beginning, and then absolutely crumbled. So it has been an interesting 14 rounds, and I mean, it did go very quickly, I felt. So let's start off with the Firebirds, and I mean, they were quite interesting at this season, I guess, because they won their first 2 games, and we talked about in our mid-season preview about this is some kind of things that they probably need to do is just to build those connections and find a solid 7. And I guess they never did that in the end, which is quite disappointing because they do have the talent to at least have gotten another win. I mean, Ruby Bakewell-Doran, she was, I think, a standout for them. She led the competition in defensive rebounds, but she was also just a consistent defensive presence for them. But I think it was the attack end for them that completely struggled. I mean, Mary, she's a great target, but I think, her shooting accuracy wasn't the best. She had a high turnover rate. She was 4th in turnovers for the competition, which usually isn't seen by a shooter. But as we'll talk about the turnovers this season, it seemed to be that every shooter was in that top 10. So, yeah, very interesting position the Firebirds are in, I guess. But yeah, do you have any general thoughts about how the Firebirds performed this season?
No, I think you sort of nailed it there. They're defensively, Ruby Bakewell-Doran was phenomenal, and she kind of had to be. She was really the leader in that team since they dropped Remy Camo last year. There was only, Isabel Shearer, who's in her second season, and then Ash Barnett, who was in her first. So it was really stand out. And I think she did that, which is really impressive to see, and especially since she was part of that leadership group as well. I actually think their midcourt, as we talked about, I think it was in our probably season preview, they had 4 players that were more than capable of being starters. And I think one of the things they seemed to struggle with was finding that right combination. So this particularly the season they were shuffling, making all these changes. They couldn't seem to quite get it right. And it almost then seemed, the last couple of games where they really pushed teams right to the end, especially that last couple of games against Vixens and the Swifts. They only had really mid-quarters there once Halida unfortunately went down with that knee injury, but they almost seemed more settled. And I think that just
Yeah.
goes to show that, yes, it's all well and good to have options, but it's then you need to have the ability to make the right choices with those options that you've got versus when you're forced to then settle into a particular lineup. And I think we almost saw something similar with the Fever defensive end, and I'm sure we'll chat about them a bit later. But once they lost Ruth Ariang to that injury in the first couple of weeks of the season, they couldn't just keep chopping and changing, and the team was sort of allowed to settle into things a bit more. And I think we definitely saw that with the Firebirds in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think the Queensland Firebirds is a team with a lot of potential. And I know in our discussions with Imogen this season and also, their interviews throughout the season, they did talk about that this kind of core group was there to build and build as seasons went along. And I think that's definitely something they'll be doing. But I definitely think heading into 2026, they really do need to look for a solid seven. And I mean, you have like an Imogen Allison who I think with another year of SSN under her belt, I think she'll really be a consistent person in there. She'll bring that leadership and also just that international experience that you can't, negate from any kind of player. I mean, also, I think they really need to find a goal attack, someone that will, take the pressure off a Mary Chollock. And to be honest, when I was trying to think about who that would possibly be, I actually couldn't think of someone I think that would necessarily, I guess, work well with a Mary Chollock. So maybe this is something that you might be able to do, but maybe like a Lauren Frew, but I can't imagine that the Thunderbirds will want to give her up. So do you have any insights into maybe who might be a good goal attack for them to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the goal attacks that are potentially off contract. I think the one that's floating around a lot of people's minds at the moment is Sophie Fawns, knowing that, she
Mm,
played such a pivotal role for the Swifts the last couple of years, but then has been really struggling to break into that team of 10 this year. More often than not, we saw Grace White named in the game day 10. And I certainly think Sophie has the ability to be a starting seven player out there. We've just got to hope that this year hasn't really sort of knocked her confidence. Something that
mm,
did pop up a couple of weeks ago was she'd signed with new management, Enigma Sport, I think they're called, and
yeah,
they're a lot of players based over in the UK Super League. So I know as soon as she announced that, there were a few sort of rumours swirling around that she might potentially be heading there. Nothing confirmed as of yet, but the fact that she's at least signed with new management, you would imagine that that means she's looking to move. I can't imagine you signed with a new management group if you're staying where you are. So I think she's one
100%.
that might look at making that move. Otherwise, someone like Unique Pallavi has had a really strong season at the Mavs. They're going to presumably have El Cardwell coming back into the fold potentially next year, and they've then got, three or four players whose first preference is all goal shooter. You can't make that work.
Yeah,
Worked for them the last 2 years. So someone like her might look at making the move. She's proven that she can work with a holding shooter like Shimona Jock. And then when she plays the VNL, she also plays with Jane Cook, who's another tall holding shooter. And she's got that creativity and that flair. And I think that's something that the Firebirds need. And I think that's something that Kiri Wills would also really be able to help nurture and help flourish.
yeah. And I mean, and speaking of Unique and the Melbourne Mavericks, they ended up being in seventh position. So, what were your thoughts on their season? I guess, they had some pretty close games in there against those top teams, but, weren't able to get in consistent wins so that they could continue pushing forward.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a case of almost a lot of the similar stuff of last year, just lacking that consistency. And I think that's a word that Tracy Neville threw around a lot in a lot of their post-match press conferences as well. When they're at their
Mm,
best, they can beat anyone, as proven by their win over the Swifts in the last couple of rounds. But then they'd absolutely fumble against some of the other teams. And yes, they still were hampered by injury. We didn't see El Cardwell out on court for them at all this year. Lauren Parkinson only played the 15 minutes across the season. She was only available for selection for the last two games. So they certainly were still hampered in that aspect. But I think there's still a lot of areas for them to look at improving their mid-court again, similar to the Firebirds. Couldn't quite seem to find that settled lineup. It seemed like Taylor Fraser really started to take hold of that wing attack bib, but then she'd get subbed off for Maisie Nankerville, and then the wheels would start to fall off. So I think there was still some potentially confusing changes for those of us watching from the sidelines. Obviously, Tracy and Richo have got a very set idea on what they're wanting to achieve, and that just didn't always come across to us that were watching from home. And then I think their defense
mm,
as well for a period of the season they had the most games. I know that sort of dropped off in the back end of the season, but I'm fairly confident that for the first half they were leading that. So I certainly think that their ability to win ball was there. It was then just falling apart down the other end of the court. So I think their defenders were probably a real highlight for them, especially Dressie Grenfold. I feel like she was phenomenal this season. She's someone I'd be very surprised
mm.
if she doesn't end up with a full-time contract somewhere next year, having shown what she can do in that 11th player position, who got to play most of the season, courtesy of Lauren Parkinson's injury, rehab continuing longer than she'd hoped it would. So yeah, I certainly think the defenders were the shining light, and the attacking end probably just still needs to sort itself out a little bit more first.
Yeah, and I think not actually understanding fully the budgeting requirements of a SSN team, but I guess having, three star shooters potentially next season, Cardwell, Sasha Glasgow, and a Shimoda Jock necessarily isn't good to be so top heavy. I
Mm.
guess, finding the budget space to bring in someone that could be a bit more of a presence in there, especially in that wing attack or center position to allow Parmenta to solely focus on establishing the wing defense position, but also giving her little opportunities in center so she grows her game, I think is something that they will be looking for 2026. But maybe who is someone that you're thinking that the Mavs could bring in for 2026 to give them a bright spark?
Yeah, so I think they probably really need to look at some extra height in that defensive end. While we know Liv Lewis has
Mm,
the days, as proven by those amazing rejects or blocks she got on Mary Chollock in one of their matchups. They
mm,
just still don't have that ability to consistently compete with those tall holding shooters. Someone like Tegan O'Shannessy is off contract from the Swifty. We know she got a lot more court time this year back in that goalkeeper position, forcing Sarah Cloud to be pushed out to goal defence. And I think she's one that a lot of people were talking about if she might potentially get a call up for the Diamond squad. So I think she's someone that would be able to thrive in a full-time, like starting position in that goalkeeper. And she's got that sort of what's the sort of word, that spark that I think Tracy looks for in her players. She's got that ability to go out for fly, contest the high ball, and she's sort of an exciting player to watch, which I think goes with that sort of Mavs brand of we're doing it differently. We don't just want the players that are going to do what everybody else is doing. We want someone that's going to add something that little bit different. So I think Tegan's certainly someone that they should potentially be looking at signing, and also keeping a hold of Jessie Grenfold as well. I think she's
mm.
got room to grow even more. And yeah, I think if they can keep her in that line, and then we know Kim Brown, sorry, is signed already for next year. So I think that's got the potential to then be a strong defensive unit that can win enough ball back. And then they probably need someone else in that mid-court, not quite sure who, but yeah, someone in that mid-court to help safely transition the ball down to the attacking end so they can really capitalize off it.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, to next go into that sixth place position, I mean, the Giants ended
Mm,
up getting there, which I don't think, not, this is probably a no offense moment that I have to say, but I don't think, based on how they were performing at the
mm,
beginning of the season, how they performed last year, how they've kind of been consistently going a bit downwards,
mm,
that they have been one of the brights. And then, yeah, so defeating the Thunderbirds and Lightning, who are both ahead of them on the table, but also ending the season on that massive high with a win over the Mavericks, which was a dominant win to send off Joe Harton. I mean, that would be, something that they'll really hold on for, depending on what their future is going to look like. As we know, it's a little bit uncertain at the moment. But, based on their 2025 season, I think Aaron O'Brien, someone that we hadn't really highlighted in that mid-season preview, because I think Jodie Ann Ward had been doing such a strong job. But ever since she's been given that goal defense position, she's been incredible. I mean, she's, tied for first for defensive rebounds with Ruby Bakewell-Doran. She's
mm.
fifth for deflections, and she's in the top five for intercepts. So to be such a young player and already have that ability to, try out a new position, basically, because I'm pretty sure she's more commonly a goalkeeper throughout her entire career, and goal defense has kind of been a new position, not a new position, but, at this level, she hasn't been tested there. So being able to, make her own and, just be a menace, I really like that. And when I went to the game that she played against the Lightning, first SSN game, loved it. But I think her and Sligo were just all over their opposition. I mean, I think Wood got sent to the bench about three times. Fretwell, sorry, got sent to the bench about three times. Cara Conan and Bachelor had no answers for that defensive combination. And do truly think this is not my New Zealand bias coming up, but I do truly think that having that experience of Casey Korpoa back at goalkeeper, you know, she's not going to be, the one that's getting all the in all the games, but I think just having that leadership in with such young players and at the front of her, being able to just tell them, this is what you need to do. If my body could do it, I would be doing it. And yeah, I think that's what's been missing the last couple of years. And that's not a slight on what Tilly McDonald was doing or Jodie Ann Ward, as they're both talented players. I think experience just does matter in that goalkeeper position. And, their attacking end really did stand up. And I think Joe Harton, for me, was a highlight in those latter games. I mean, she just looked confident. And I think we haven't seen that in a while. And maybe it was that decision, we've seen over in New Zealand, there's a lot of players that aren't necessarily going for silver ferns, but have been like that pressure's now off of them to just fully attack these last couple of games and just go, you know what, I'm retiring. I want to make sure that I'm going to be, sending off my career on a good note. And that's exactly what she's done.
Yeah, I certainly think. I know I think in the media when Casey first came over, there was a bit of talk around the fact that they're in a training session and Joe was passing off the ball all the time when she was in the circle. And Casey looked at her and just
Mm,
said, "Why are you passing that off? You always used to shoot them. What's stopping you doing it now?" And it seemed like that
mm,
was a reset for Joe. So I think not only did Casey bring that confidence and experience to the defensive end, but she boosted up everyone around her. And yeah, I certainly think, there was lots of talk again in the media when Casey was brought over, the Australian pathway is dead. There's not the chance for these young players to come through. But look at the growth that's now given to O'Brien and Sligo. Like you said, they flew up the stat sheet. I think it was Sligo finished second in the league for intercepts behind Latanya Wilson. That's wild
mm.
for a wing defence. So yeah, I think the knowledge that she's been able to bring them, yes, it might have meant that another Australian player didn't have the chance to come up and play, but the knowledge and experience that she's given to those two Australian players, they're two that I can potentially see again getting named in that Diamond squad, potentially as invitees, maybe not in the full-time squad yet, but I certainly think
Mm.
that they've made the Australian selectors look at them and be like, hey, look at what I can do. If you put me in there with an experienced player, which, the Diamonds are obviously full of, imagine what they'll be capable of there.
Yeah, I think Sligo is definitely someone that is there for the future. I mean, she was third, I think, for intercepts, and she was high in those other defensive stats as well. And in at wing defense, that is impressive. And I think it was just that tenacity that she kind of put into her game this season, where maybe it was that confidence last season. She was competing with Sammy Winders and Jamie Lee Price for game time. And this season, she's really stood her ground and, made sure that the wing defense position was hers.
Mm.
Um, but I think heading into that 2026 season, for them, they've obviously got some key positions that are opening up. You have Joe Harton leaving, Casey Corpua. I highly doubt that she would be back. It would be great. I would personally love it. But I mean, realistically, I don't think she'll do a full season at a preseason. So I think we can kind of write that up at the moment. But also there is that rumor of, Jamie Lee Price heading to Melbourne a little bit earlier than probably we were expecting. So that's goal shoot, center, and goal keep all opening up. And that's, they would have been players that on their budget would have taken up quite a bit of it. So being able to lure people over will be something that I think they will struggle with that uncertainty of their future. But
Mm.
I think realistically, if we're going to look at goal shooters that they could bring in, I think the number one candidate has to be Liv Cheen. I mean, she, is someone that, on the international stage in 2024 was just outstanding. And you can't look past what she's done as well with the London Pulse this season. I think she's just consistent. She shoots those 2-pointers, and she was one of the key reasons won that premiership this year. Um, I think as well, if they want to bring in an Aussie talent, then definitely look at a Lucy Austin. I mean, she's available, obviously, with the Thunderbirds kind of not giving her as many opportunities as probably we all thought she would get. So definitely bringing her in, I think she would work quite well. I think with Dwyer as well, just being that height, and being able to work along that baseline, so that Dwyer has the openness of the circle to just slide on in and get the ball or take the two-pointers and Lucy Austin will be able to take two-pointers too. I think goalkeeper, maybe swaying someone from the Lightning. I think either Ash Irvine or someone with a bit more experience, as we've seen, that was kind of a formula that worked. So maybe this could be a reset for Courtney Bruce. I don't know. I think, as you'll discuss in a minute when we go down into that section about the Sunny Coast Lightning, I think, they've got a lot of depth, but it's not clicking. I think, and maybe that this is the opportunity for, some movement around and see if whether that is Courtney Bruce maybe down at Ash Irvine, or even, as I'll mention in my Swiss, Sarah Clow. I think she could also be someone. But um, yeah, do you have any thoughts about who maybe could be a good spot for the Giants before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think the one other player that we haven't talked about who's actually thriving over in New Zealand at the moment, but is from Australia, is Donnell Wallam. She obviously moved over to the Mystics this year, by all accounts, has had a great season. I haven't been able to catch any of the ANZ, but Mystics are through to the grand final, which is really
Yeah.
exciting, knowing that the tumultuous couple of years she's had at the Firebirds. It's really great to see her thriving over in New Zealand. And I can't help but wonder if she does have plans to head back over to Australia. We know she seems to be really loving it over there. But yeah, I think if she was to want to return back to Australia, that would be the perfect sort of environment for her to come into. So another one that, as I saw you shaking your head there, not keen
Oh,
on
I'm still
her back
shaking. I'm
over
still
to us.
shaking.
But just
I'm still
like
shaking my head.
that's out there, and has the ability to shoot the 2 points. Giants have always prided themselves on having three shooters that can attack the post from range. And yeah, she fits the bill like those that you mentioned of Liv Cheen and Lucy Austin as well. So
Yeah, I will disagree that I do not want that to happen. I think keeping her in New Zealand, it will be amazing. So before, but once again, my bias comes out. But next up is, as we've just said, the Sunny Coast Lightning, and I think you could probably talk a lot more about, as a fan of their game, kind of what was maybe the last straw, I guess, in that Thunderbirds game as well that you were at that made them potentially lose.
yeah, so I think the Lightning, the start of last year when they'd signed Courtney Bruce and Liz Watson to come across, everyone was sort of, basically had penciled them in for the premiership before the season had even started. And last year they finished fourth, but then went out in that first game in the finals. This year they had no changes, so they ended up just keeping everything the same and finished fifth, just missing out on finals after that last game against the Thunderbirds, which was really disappointing for them. And in that post-match press conference after the game, both Belinda and Steph were just absolutely devastated. Belinda mentioned that the vibe in the change room was just so flat. Just because, they'd had such high expectations of themselves. So I think one thing they need to look at doing for next year is reinvigorating the lineup. I know a fair few of their players were signed on for the 3 years, including the likes of Courtney Brew, Liz Watson. But I think they need to find something to add that extra bit of spark in there because, similar to what we said for the Giants when they signed all of their players after finishing eighth last year, it's like, well, what can change if you don't change anything? So I think Lightning need
Mm,
to look at doing something that's going to change the lineup. But as we've said, they've got all, star players. So how do you figure out what needs to change? So I think that's going to be a tough decision for Belinda Reynolds to be making over the off season because, as we've said, on paper, they should be absolutely thriving. They've got, pretty much capped diamonds up in most positions across the court. So yeah, I think they probably need to find a way to reinvigorate themselves or develop a sort of vastly different game plan to what they've been running with this year because it's not
mm.
it's not working for them. A team with that caliber of players should be making finals reasonably easily. They shouldn't be needing to fight their way, having it come down to the last game of the season for them to get there.
Yeah, to be honest, like as I said, I went to that Lightning game with the Giants, but also, watching them throughout the season, I think they're just, well, it's almost they're consistently flat. And
Mm.
I think that's quite a sad thing to say because they are all very talented players, but I don't think Fretwell has been that strong this season. It consistently, I think there's been some great games that she's had, but it's the consistency element that, she's been praised her entire career for having. And this was probably the first season where she hasn't been able to drag her teammates, I guess, to that, playoffs with her performance alone. I think last year she was doing a whole lot of work. And then this season, she hasn't been able to necessarily reach that standard again. I think Liz Watson has been really flat and should have been benched quite a few times. And I know that has been, quite a common sentiment from not only, reading on Twitter and people in our comments, but the media have also pointed that out that, you know, if she's able to bench a Courtney Bruce, who is a ball winner,
Mhm.
she needs to also be able to bench someone like Liz Watson, who isn't necessarily performing for 60 minutes every game like she used to be able to. So maybe who, obviously, because they have signed quite a lot of their players till next season, but maybe what do you think they could do? One thing, because obviously we don't have all the time in the world, but one thing that they could be doing that 2026 player or a strategy that they could do.
Yeah, I mean, next year we will hopefully see Ava Black return from her ACL injury, and that'll at least give them a little bit more flexibility through the midcourt. I think by signing Christiana Manua as a replacement for Ava Black, she was very much more that sort of wing defense, goal defense cover, which we already had a
Mm,
lot of goal defense cover. So I do often wonder, we only had those two attacking middies with Lisa Maimai and Liz Watson, so that probably did make it a little bit harder to be able to pull change in that attacking mid-court, which is something I'd flagged earlier in the season when she was announced as their replacement player. But I think they probably do need someone potentially maybe in that wing defense position that's a bit more of a ball winner, and can sort of add that real spark. Cassidy's really good at that, grinding down your players, doing that sort of real hard tagging work, which does really
mm,
then open up the ability for the likes of your Courtney Bruce and your Ash Irvin to go for flies. But I think we probably need someone that can help win that ball a little bit higher up through the court. Because yeah, like I said, this individually, each of the players has the ability to be absolutely amazing. So I think
mm,
something there needs to change, or as we've mentioned, Belinda needs to have that confidence and that ability to drag players when she needs to. As we've said, she's done it with Courtney Bruce. She does it with Steph Fretwell. Why can't you do it to someone like Liz Watson? Liz is a world class player. I don't see why she wouldn't be able to handle that, come 5 minutes, take a breather, have a look at the game, enter and readjust. It's not like you can give her the opportunity to sort of sit out there and keep working through it. It only works for so long. At some point, you've just got to pull them off, have a look at the game, give them some feedback, and go on with it. So hopefully that's something that she'll be a bit more willing to do. And even if she didn't want to lose that experience at the wing attack position, we've seen in the past, Steph Fretwell's been swung out to wing attack. So maybe if her goals
mm.
like they were in that Thunderbirds game, rather than pulling her off the court completely, shift Liz back to centre, which they did a couple of times, then maybe put Steph into that wing attack position. So they've still got that creativity and leadership down there, but they've got Ruan Kara in the circle at the same time.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Well, now that's we've talked about those four eliminated teams, I guess now we get to talk about those very exciting matchups we have this weekend, which are the finals games. We have the Vixens versus the Thunderbirds fighting for a spot for the preliminary final, and then you have the Fever and the Swifts fighting off over in Perth, where they will be contesting for that automatic spot into the grand final. So, Georgia, what are your thoughts about the Vixens versus the Thunderbirds this weekend? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating game. Both grand finalists from last year, but only one of them has the chance to actually make it through to the grand final this year. And if you look at them on paper, T-Birds have got the wood over the Vixens in that sense. They've won both their clashes this year, both the finals last year. Last time they lost to them was, I think it was round 3 or 4 of last season, and it was by 1 or 2 points. It certainly wasn't an absolute thrashing like some of the matchups have been this year, and particularly in Adelaide as well. Thunderbirds have won the last several clashes between the two in Adelaide. So I think it's set up to be an absolutely cracking game, which is just what you want. You want all the heat of the moment in the finals. I think the Vixens have sort of faltered a little bit in these last couple of weeks. That does sort of line up with that loss of Hannah Mundy to that foot injury that we're still not quite sure when she's potentially going to be back. There was talk about her getting back for the grand final if they make it there, but they've got to make it first, and they've certainly got an uphill battle to get there. So I think a lot of what this game is going to come down to is the ability of Kira Austin and Sophie Garvin. As I'm not sure if we've flagged it yet, but Kira Austin led the league for turnovers this. Sophie Garvin sat in fourth. So that is a wild amount of turnovers to have from a shooting combination, especially one that would we presume would be the starting lineup as well. So I think the ability of those two to work together to help sort of deconstruct that Thunderbirds defensive end is going to be absolutely key. If Kira Austin can come out with that same confidence that she had in the grand final last year, where I think she probably should have been named player of the match, even though she was in the losing side. I think she's the one that's really got the ability to sort of drag them over the line in that sense. And hopefully, if Sophie Garvin can enjoy the fact that she's not having to come up against Shamira Sterling-Humphrey, which we know is someone that she's traditionally struggled against. Not that Laddie Wilson is any easier of a battle at this point, but I think if those two can really start off on the right foot and have a really strong beginning to the game, then I think that'll go a long way in potentially helping them to get over the line.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, that Kiera Austin and Sophie Garvin both are in that top five. So Garvin's third, I believe.
Yeah, okay.
But what's it called? Austin having 97 turnovers for the competition, Garvin having 68.
Mm.
I think that is terrible for a shooting combination to have. And I mean, any shooting combination should have. I like realistically, that should be the turnover rate of Cholok and Latu Miafo or Emily Moore because they have never worked together before. But this is a combination that is the Australian Diamond shooting combination. They've been now together for 2 or 3 seasons at the Vixens. So they're consistently working together and have been praised for being such a strong combination. But 165 turnovers between two players is not good enough. And I think they'll be very disappointed in, I guess, their shooter to shooter not clicking. And, that could be something that in 2026 they look to reset. But I think for next week, the pressure that they will have is immense because Latanya Wilson will, looking for a shooter to shooter play. And Tilly Garrett will be like almost allowing that to happen, I think, letting that space open so that Latanya Wilson can just slick on through because that's what she's been season. She's challenged every goal shooter to their absolute max. And, she's been doing it, for several seasons now. But I think this year without Shamira there, she's really been able to say, this is my defensive circle and practically nothing's going to get past me to the point where she even nearly got the Thunderbirds to defeat the Fever because of how well she was playing up against Jhaniele. So they will really need to work on that. But maybe let's look at a strength. I guess I've highlighted their weak spot, but maybe what is the biggest strength that the Vixens will have over the Thunderbirds, do you think?
I think you can't look past the emotion that they're going to be going into this game with, knowing that Simone McInnes is retiring at the end of the season. They're such a united group. Simone's been with that team for so long, and so many of those players, the likes of Kate Maloney, Jo Weston, even Kate Eddy's been around there for quite a while now. They've all sort of grown up through their netball career with Simone McInnes, and they love playing for her. So I think knowing that they haven't had the results they've wanted to against the Thunderbirds more recently, that should be a really good catalyst firecracker for them to really try and rally and do it for her essentially. And obviously they want to win regardless of whether the coach is going out or not, but I think that's just potentially going to give them that extra bit of edge. And it was really nice to see actually the last game they had against the Firebirds, there had been a bit of talk that both Lily Graham and Maggie Carris hadn't made it on court since I think it was about round 7 or 8 or something. Can't remember the exact round. But Simone had the balls to put them on the court and get them court time heading into finals, which I think will go a long way in giving not only the players but also her the confidence that if she does need to pull any changes on the day, that she can do that with confidence, knowing that the players have only been out on court last week. They're not having to, they haven't had 2 months off, and all of a sudden they're being put out in this pressure cooker situation. So yeah, I think that extra bit of oomph that will come from knowing that they want to send Simone out on a positive note will hopefully be enough to really help push them over the line and make it a tight contest.
Yeah, so let's do a quick. I'm going to throw you on the spot this time. Quick prediction as to who do you think is going to win the game?
I still can't go past the Thunderbirds. Having seen them this year, I've been fortunate enough to be at all their home games for the stuff we do here, and they always seem to have an answer. I think, yeah, the fear of God that Latanya Wilson and even Matilda Garrett over the last couple of rounds were able to put into their shooting opposition is just next level. Home crowd advantage obviously goes a long way as well. And I think that yeah, even if the attackers have that sort of ability to the Thunderbirds attackers, this is do sort of struggle to sometimes find that right combination, especially if Lauren Frew off and you then have to switch Georgie Horges into that goal attack position. They do lack that sort of clarity around who's best in that wing attack, whether it be Taylor Williams or Kayla Graham coming in. I think regardless, the Thunderbirds have probably just got that slight edge, but I am hoping that it's a really close game. I think lots of us went into that grand final last year expecting it to be an absolute walkover from the Thunderbirds, and they only came away with it by two. So I'm just hoping it's a really tight contest. Maybe not extra time. That might be a bit too stressful after another extra time game we already had last week. But hoping for still a really close contest. But I do think the Thunderbirds will get over on top.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that the Thunderbirds, obviously, you can't go past a team with Latanya Wilson, as we've discussed, but also I think they have quite struggled to stop Romelda this season, and that connection between her and the feeders, despite, having one of their, weaker years as a combination, the Vixens still haven't been able to figure it out. So I think that I think it's going to be a bit more comfortable, to be honest, than we're probably expecting. And I think, Romelda's a big time player. Latania's a big time player. And I think the Vixens have been too inconsistent this year to even show that they're to show that they're consistent enough to be big time players in that big moment. So yeah, I think the Thunderbirds are going to win.
Sure.
And now we get to talk about that second semi-final,
Mhm.
the Swiss versus the Fever. And I mean, oh, it breaks my heart to even say this, but I don't think the Swiss have a chance. I really don't. I I'm just gonna say my prediction at the bat. I think the Fever are gonna be absolutely dominant.
Mm.
Um, I think the Swifts have been, in our mid-season preview, we were like, who's gonna stop this team? And they had
Even was like,
and
it'll be me. We'll do it.
yeah,
Watch
exactly.
us.
Well, was it round nine or round eight? They absolutely
Mm.
demolished the Swifts, and I think ever since then, the Swifts' confidence has gone down. They haven't been as punchy or wanting to try new things, I guess, to get the ball in. Like I remember in rounds, like in the beginning of half of the season, they were just throwing the ball into Grace,
Mm.
and it would 99% of the time go in. And now the Fever have shown the rest of the league being like, this is what all you needed to do was to just be on her and force Helen to perform. And we've all talked about it this season that Helen hasn't been as involved, I guess, in shooting attempts, but also in her overall offensive game. And she stepped it up a little bit, but nowhere near enough to push them forward to win these big games or even win games that get like they basically barely won against the Firebirds.
Mm.
They barely won against the Giants in, the grand scheme of things. And they lost to the Lightning and they lost to the Mavs.
Mm.
And these are teams that are not even in the playoffs. So I know, and it sucks that they're in this position, but I think realistically, the playoffs, it's almost giving to me like the magic of the ANZ Championship. Like they had all this talent. Everyone loved the attacking end because it had all the big stars in it. And the defensive end on paper looked amazing and they had, all this talent. And then they couldn't make it work. And they never did. Obviously, the Magic ended up winning a premiership 5 years later, but the Swifts do not have 5 years with Grace Nowicki to be able to achieve that. They needed it this season, and I think they're not going to do it. I think I think Grace has been great this season. I think Paige Hadley has been great this season. Um, but I think the rest of the players aren't necessarily stepping up to the level that they would normally be at or should be at by this time of the season. And I think that's something I'd be looking at is if Sarah Clow can bring it out and somehow stop the feed into Jhaniele, I think they'll have a chance. I wouldn't be surprised if Tegan O'Shaughnessy started at goalkeeper or was a big
Tegan
part of the.
O'Shaughnessy is out for the finals with a back injury. So, yeah.
Okay.
So that further complicates things for the Swifts. So yeah, so they've got Clow and Turner in defence, and then they've
Yeah.
brought in training partner Freddie Schneiderman. There has been a few people speculating if maybe, with ANZ having finished up, heading into finals, and there's a few players who would be available there now, and also the NSL having finished up, if they might look at potentially bringing someone over from one of those leagues to fill that defensive spot. But well, we'll just have to wait and see. Otherwise, yeah, they'll probably be running with Clow and Turner for the whole 60.
Which isn't not enough. And I
No.
think, and I think like Maddie Turner, I think has, not been performing to a level I think that she would want to be performing at this time of the season too. I think even if you brought in someone from international that, like, just thinking of the teams that are available from New Zealand, which would be the Magic, the Steel, and the Stars, there's no necessarily a defensive player that I think should even be brought in over for this kind of like it's like Kara Stith would probably I think she's an amazing player. She's had a great season and potentially a silver fern bolter. But she's not a player that you just bring into the Swifts and go, okay, yeah, you're going to win us a premiership against Jhaniele Fowler. She's not going to be a player that you bring up against Jhaniele and she'll get the ball every
Mm.
single time they need. Um, yeah, and every other player, Georgia Tong's retired, and there's quite a few other players that are probably nowhere near the level that they require. So, yeah, I think, yeah, it's going to be a hard stop, and I think Jhaniele has pretty much transformed this Fever team this year. I mean, started off the year with 2 losses, and then they've gone on this 12-game winning streak. I think Alice Neal has also been phenomenal in her play, but I think any player that has worked with this amount of time would also become an amazing feeder to her. I think you can also see that with Shanice. They know exactly how to feed her. They've been around her for so many years, and having that kind of experience of not only the player but the connection is crucial. So, um, I would say the only slight that the Fever probably have is in those games against the Mavericks and the Thunderbirds, where they were a bit closer. Uh,
Mhm.
there were two things I noticed. So that one, Jhaniele had stronger pressure against her. I guess the Mavericks were a bit more both on her, forcing Shanice and Olivia Wilkinson to take a bit more charge, and then the Thunderbirds had Latanya Wilson. So that pretty much sums up why it was closer. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any particular thoughts on that too, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Fever have already got probably 1 3/4 hands on the Premiership Cup at this point. I think yeah, Swifts have had that really strong start to the season, but then really dropped off in the back half. Whether that be because teams figured them out, as we said, Fever sort of gave everyone the blueprint of how to beat them. And yeah, ever since Fever came back with, ever since Fowler-Nembhard came back with the Fever, they've just looked unstoppable. Even in the close games, when you're watching them, I still never felt like they'd get run over. I still always felt
Mm.
like we're going to come away with the win. So yeah, I'm pretty, as I've already said, I think, the Thunderbirds will come away with the win in the minor semi-final. Fever will come away with the win in the major, and then in that battle between the Thunderbirds and the Swifts, the following week, I think the Thunderbirds will probably come out on top with that one, and we'll get, yeah, a Fever Thunderbirds grand final. And I do think the Fever will come away with the win in that one.
Yeah, I think it will be definitely interesting. I think for if it is the Swift and the Thunderbirds that face off, in that second v for third, I think it's going to be a close game. I think so. I think the Grace is able to almost, work around Latanya Wilson a lot better than those taller defenders like Katie Ann, or if she was to go up against the Vixens as well, like Joe Weston, Rudy Ellis, Maggie Karras. I think she'll actually fare a little bit better against Latanya Wilson this time around. They're obviously in their game that they had last time, it was a close game. And in the end, it was just that ability to almost wear Latanya Wilson down that got them over the edge. So,
Mm.
yeah, I think it's definitely going to be an interesting playoffs season, for sure. And I don't know, do we have fan questions?
Yeah, so we put a little sticker up on our Instagram after the final game on Sunday and had a few people sort of get in with some questions or stuff they wanted us to discuss. A lot of it we have already discussed. They wanted just sort of a rundown of the teams, some prep for finals, and then someone also wanted a in-depth review at the end of the season. So we'll definitely have another episode like this coming out after the grand final, where we'll wrap up everything that happened in the final series, and we're hoping to also get someone from one of the grand final winning teams on board for that as well. So make sure you stay tuned so you don't miss when that comes out. But there was also some people that were really interested in some of the stats. I feel like netball's probably a sport where some of the stats are gate kept a little bit. We've got champion data, which records some amazing stuff, but not a lot of it gets published. But we're fortunate enough to have access to some of that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to run through a bit of that for those playing along at home, and especially some of the stats for those sort of underrated players, the ones that we don't necessarily talk about a whole heap. Now, I know this came up towards the back end of the season in particular. Supershot's been around for a long time now. The most accurate player for the Supershot this year that took more than one shot, there were a few shooters that sat on 1 from 1, but that was actually Cara Conan. She finished with 13 from 19 attempts at 68%. And especially, I think, after the season that she had at the start of the year, where there was lots of flack going to her from the media and even herself, she was quite open and upfront and said, I might make myself redundant if I can't shoot the 2-point shots because pretty much every shooter out there these days is taking them. So I think for her to really step up in that back end of the season, especially when, as we talked about earlier, Steph Fretwell's form started to fade a little bit, I think that really showed her growth as a player. And then you compare that to someone like Sophie Garbin. Last year, she was shooting 2-point shots semi-regularly. I didn't get the chance to go back and check what her stats were, but this year she shot 2 from 11. So there was all that talk about
Yeah.
Cara Conan at the start of the year about how she wouldn't shoot them, wouldn't do it. None of that was going Sophie Garbin's direction. And maybe that's because she shot them last year, so people were sort of forgetting that she hadn't shot them. But yeah, I certainly think that's something that was just interesting when I was going through stuff, knowing all the flack that Cara was getting at the start of the season, but then she was able to really turn that around versus someone like Garbin, who never seemed to catch much of that flack from the media and just sort of was able to slide under the radar.
I mean, she's definitely had her fair share. Let's be honest. I think 2023
Back
she
in the
was
day.
absolutely ripped to shreds. So I think, yeah, good for her for sliding past with that. I think, 2024 she proved that she's an amazing player, and she did this year too, but maybe just not in that particular stat.
Yeah, and then another one that came up when I was looking through everything is gains. As we know, we've already talked about Wilson, Latanya Wilson and Erin O'Brien topped the league for that, but we know defenders are going to get gains. That's kind of their job. So I always like going through and looking at what attacker got the most gains. Have you got any guesses as to who you think that might have been?
I mean, to be honest, I think it would definitely have to be someone like Kira Austin. She's always on the defensive prowl. So, yeah.
Yeah, so as comms always talk about it, it's one of Kath Cox's favourite things to mention if she's ever on a Vixens game. Kira Austin finished with 19 games across the season, which is average of more than one a game. So I think that's a pretty impressive
Mm.
stat for an attacker. And Kira often talks about enjoying being one of those players that gets to win a bit of defensive ball. And then I think another couple that I enjoyed looking at were the bad hands stats. So essentially dropped or fumbled balls. And this one surprised me a little bit. We had this, the top one didn't surprise me. That was Shimona Jock. We've obviously known her, the growth of her strength in her hands over the last couple of seasons has been phenomenal, but she finished the season with 17 bad hands calls against her. It's probably the second one that surprised me, and that was Jhaniele Fowler-Nembhard. She was probably someone that we would associate as having the safest hands in the league, but I think that's probably more a reflection of the balls that she's forced to try and pull in. Because as we know,
Mm,
Eva feeders just lob it to her from absolutely anywhere. And so obviously you're then going to have more of a chance of potentially fumbling them when they're not quite put in that pinpoint perfect position. So yeah, I think that was an interesting one to find out. And then there was another one that I'd looked at. Oh, that's right. Goal assists. So Liz Watson, as we know, an absolute feeding machine. She had 578 goal. Oh no, that must have been feeds, I think. 578 goal assists seems massive. 578
I
feeds.
don't think they scored that many goals.
No, exactly. That can't be right. So it must be 578 feeds. That was almost 100 more than the next person. So I think not only does that
Crazy.
show the game style of the Lightning, where they are constantly passing in and out, a bit similar to the Giants, wanting that sort of constant repositioning. But it then also makes you wonder, is she giving the ball at the right time? You should be giving the ball to a shooter.
Yeah.
They're in a position to shoot the ball. So I think that's probably, maybe that's an area that the Lightning need to look at when we were talking a bit earlier. What do they need to do to get their shooters in that better shooting position? Because as we know, every time you pass the ball is an extra chance for the defenders to get hands to it. So Lightning potentially need to look at being a bit more efficient to post. We know they pride themselves on their ball speed, and that is something that comes with a lot of passes, but maybe they need to find a way to be that little bit more direct to post. Because while we know Clara Conan has beautiful movement in and out of the circle, she's tall, she's got jumps, she does have that ability to be a holding shooter under the post that is going to make them that bit more efficient. And yeah, they were the main stats that jumped out to me that I think some of them were surprising, some of them not, but I think still nice to share with everybody as yeah, something that doesn't necessarily always make it out on the analysis shows that Fox Netball put out for us.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, I think I've just looked up on the website. So it's Liz Watson, 578 feeds, I believe, because her goal assists were only 286. So I think that kind of supports what you were just saying. That's 292 times, if my math is correct, but I'm not a math major. But around that, uh, the amount of times that, those didn't translate to goals.
Mm.
That's a lot of feats that didn't translate to goals. So definitely they'll look into that over the off season and into next year to try and figure out how to translate her amazing feeds into goals because that
Absolutely.
should be the aim. But also I am going to wrap this up and we're going to do one last question. I mean, I think we've all watched a lot of the season, if not the entire season, and we've seen some standout players this year. So just based on the regular season, I think it is pretty much a contest between two players. But who is your decision in the debate of who was the regular season MVP?
So I'm not going to go back and count how many times we mentioned each player's name across this chat, but there's one that constantly popped up throughout the season for me, and that was Latanya Wilson. I feel like, we know the difference that Jhaniele Fowler-Nembhard made when she came back to the Fever. There's no denying that. As you've mentioned, the team went undefeated since she came back into the side. But I think Latanya's ability to not only step up in the absence of Shamira Sterling, but cover all three defensive positions. I'd be willing to say she is the best wing defense, best goal defense, and best goalkeeper we have in the world at the moment. I don't think we've ever
Yeah.
had a player who we could confidently say is the best in the world at three positions. That's just wild. So I think her
Mm,
versatility and her ability to dominate in all different types of shooters. She can play against a moving shooter. She can play against a holding shooter. She can play that shutdown rollout at wing defense and goal defense. She can go out and fly for ball. I don't think we've got someone that's that strong and that versatile, and I don't know if we will in the near future, looking at the other players that are around at the moment. So yeah, she's my personal pick. We do have at some point this week a Netball Scoop article dropping that's going to have our top five players named. A bunch of contributors for Netball Scoop were asked to send in their top five players for the Super Netball season. So yeah, Latanya Wilson was who I had as my top player. So I'll be interested to see if other people agree with me. I'm sure there'll be more consensus than we've had in previous years, but certainly keep an eye out on our socials for that one so you can see what everybody's opinions were. Because who would you have as your top player?
I'm trying to remember who I ended up placing in that list. I'm quickly going back. Yeah, I put Latanya Wilson, I think. Um, Yeah, definitely she has been standout. And as you said, I do agree that she is the best wing defense, and goalkeeper. And almost trying to figure out where to place her for if we are to do a team of the year is going to be hard because
Mm.
realistically, we can just like maneuver her name around and go, okay, if we want to cover that position and we have two other players, then they can slot into where they are. So I think that'll be quite interesting. But I think, yeah, it was only really a debate between her
Mm.
and Jhaniele Fowler-Nembhard. Um, so to those that are watching to the end, firstly, thank you. But also, what are your thoughts? Do you think that Latanya Wilson's individual success has been enough to take her to that MVP spot, or do you think that the presence of Jhaniele Fowler coming in and being able to usher the Fever from going zero from two to start the season to then 12 wins on the trot is enough to say that basically she is the most valuable player of not only her team but the competition? Let us know in the comments down below. But let's wrap things up. I mean, we've had an extensive chat regarding the
Mm.
finals preview. We also attaching to this will be a article that some of our amazing Netball Scoop writers will be a part of, previewing the final series and also giving a wrap of the round 14. So yeah, please go check those articles out on netballscoop.com.au. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much, Georgia, for joining me today and recapping and also giving a preview for the finals this year.
Lovely. Can't wait to catch up and chat about all the finals actions that have unfolded in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, go Swifts, go Swifts, go Swifts. Awesome. Sweet.
This podcast was recorded on the land of the Ghana people.